Ekaterina has first degree in philosophy and logic from Moscow State University, and then she moved on to a master and a PhD from University of Paris 1. Sorry, my French is terrible. Paris 1. And after that, she moved to a postdoctoral position in Brazil. So the Center for Logical Epistemology and the History of Science at the University of Campinas. And we're actually very pleased to that Ekaterina will be our next postdoctoral researcher. She will join Lucy as soon as the admin troubles we are going through will be resolved. But we are hopeful this will be very soon. So that makes us very happy that Ekaterina will join us and extend our group with her expertise. Ekaterina has published already in top journals, Synthese, Logic Journal of the IGPL, and her expertise is essentially in logic and formal epistemology. And today she will talk us about ignorance as an excuse formally. So Ekaterina, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction. First of all, I would like to thank for inviting me, and it is a great pleasure for me for joining the Luce group. So looking forward to work all together. I'm very pleased to present some of my previous work today. So it is a joint work with Marcio Claus Pereira and Mattia Petrolo. From my title, you can see I will speak today about the notion of ignorance, notion I've been working for the last 3 years. It is a very complex notion and many levels. So there are various situations involving ignorance. They may share some similarities, but most of the times they are quite different. So only recently, this notion, the notion of ignorance, gained its own place in the studies on epistemology and knowledge representation. So today, my aim is quite modest. I will not speak about ignorance in general, but I will speak about particular cases of ignorance, particular situations in which ignorance can count as an excuse for some agents' actions. So here I should remark from the beginning, I will not discuss any legal issues concerning ignorance, but I will take more a moral perspective. So the outline of my presentation is as follows. So I will start by recalling some situations of ignorance and exemplifying the difference between ignorance, which might be considered as a full excuse for some agents' actions, and one which not. So in the second part of my presentation, I will present you a particular formal setting. It will be characterized by standard Kripke semantics for representing the kind of ignorance which excuses. So I will introduce you to a static logic of excusable ignorance. Then in the third part, I will extend the setting by means of public announcement logic in order to capture the possible dynamic change between some agents' state of excusable ignorance to the non-excusable one. So this will permit us, first of all, to consider the precise conditions under which some agent is morally excusable and in which he or she is not. And secondly, all these technical tools will be useful for extending this line of research from not just perspective of human agents communication, but also capture the communication between human and artificial agents and even artificial intelligence systems. So I will conclude by summing up the results and maybe saying a few words about possible extensions of this investigation. So let's start. So one of the leading scholars in epistemology of ignorance, Rick Peels, very active, In his article of 2014, Which Kind of Ignorance Excuses to Neglected Issues, distinguished 4 situations of ignorance: factive ignorance, ignorance of a true proposition. So they are disbelieving, suspending, deep, and warrantless ignorance. So we say that an agent is disbelievingly ignorant that P if proposition is true, and the agent disbelieves that P. The agent is suspendingly ignorant that P if we speak about true proposition, and the agent suspends her belief on P. She is deeply ignorant that P if proposition is true, and the agent neither believes that P, nor disbelieves that P, nor suspends her belief that P. So it is, she doesn't consider it as neither as true nor as false proposition. And we say that an agent is warrantlessly ignorant that P if proposition is true, the agent believes that P, and the agent doesn't know that P. So this corresponds to so-called Gettier cases. Yes, Giuseppe?
Yeah, sorry. So here disbelieves that P means believing that P, or just not believing P?
Disbeliefs, it is not belief in the negation of P.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. So having these 4 types, it is not possibly not exhaustive list of situations of ignorance, but having at least these types of ignorance situations, Peirce argues that it is disbelieving and deep ignorance which provide an agent with a full excuse. Why? Disbelieving is the case that the agent acts on the fact that he's convinced, he believes in the negation of the proposition, and deep ignorance, in the case of deep ignorance, the agent acts on the basis of absence of the truth of the proposition. So let me exemplify these 2 kinds, these situations of excusable and non-excusable ignorance on the following 2 examples, again taken from the article of Rick Peirce. So he writes, if I give my daughter a piece of chocolate that, unbeknownst to me, was poisoned by a maniac who happened to choose my house for his malicious action, and I have no indication whatsoever to think that the chocolate is poison, then it seems I am not blameworthy at all for giving her that piece of chocolate. So in this case, the agent apparently is fully excusable for poisoning, giving the poisoned chocolate to his daughter on the basis of his either disbelieving or deep ignorance. So this situation can cover both of this situation, both of these cases of ignorance. Either the father gives this chocolate because from all what he considers, he doesn't conceive the proposition about poisoned chocolate as neither true nor false, or even, and this is the case of deep ignorance, or even he may disbelieve and been convinced, and in all that he considers as possibly true, the proposition the chocolate is poisoned is false. So we have negation of this proposition in all possible scenarios for this for the father, agent in our case, and thus again he's excusable for his action because he acted on the basis of his full ignorance. Compare this with the following modification of the example. So imagine that I heard on the news that some maniac is poisoning people's chocolate bars in my neighborhood. I noticed that my chocolate bar is opened, but then I know that we often leave open chocolate bars in the desk and finish them later. I nonetheless decide to give it to my daughter. Imagine that it is poisoned. It seems that in that case, I'm blameworthy for giving it to my daughter. I act recklessly in doing so and violate an objective obligation not to give it to her. So what is the main difference here? The main difference is that in some, the agent receives some input which indicate that the proposition, the chocolate bar can be poisoned, might be true. So by the news, by the fact that he sees that the chocolate is already open, and so on and so on. So in this case, we cannot fully excuse the actions of father. Why? Because he had at least 1-2 possibilities of considering that the chocolate might be poisoned, and thus that his actions might lead to the death or something of his daughter. So in what follows, I will provide a formal setting which permits as I said before, to capture both of these situations and to see how excusable ignorance, so first example, can precisely be transformed into the second one. So the transition between excusable and non-excusable ignorance. But before presenting my own setting, let me say some words about usual standard mainstream ignorance representations that we find in the literature. So one of them, the first to the best of my knowledge, explicit logical system for ignorance representation, was introduced by van der Hoek and Lamuscio in 2004. There they use standard Kripke semantics and introduce special operator, primitive operator I, instead of more usual believing or K operator for knowledge, as follows. So here I put the superscript W to say that we are speaking here about ignorance whether. So they say that an agent is ignorant whether phi in a world W if and only if there exists an accessible world which doesn't validate phi and there exists another accessible world which doesn't validate negation of phi. Similarly, the worlds which validate phi and validate not phi. So another option can be found in the article of Stainswell, where he introduces ignorance in a sense of unknown truth. So he says that we are ignorant of phi in the sense of unknown truth in W, if and only if phi is true in the world W, and there exists an accessible world which doesn't validate phi. So these are basically the most popular operators for ignorance representation. However, both of them are centered to capture the notion of ignorance in its generality, and they are not enough sensitive to distinguish the two examples that I presented before. So both of these operators can be used as representing suspicious ignorance, as well as suspending ignorance, as well as deep ignorance, disbelieving ignorance. But so in this case, the use of this operator do not provide us with sufficient tools to distinguish excusable and non-excusable ignorance. Moreover, both of these operators are not exactly, in its current form, are not exactly suitable for representing situations of deep ignorance, where the agent doesn't consider proposition neither as true nor as false. So in order to find the logical setting for provide fine-grained models for representing exactly excusable ignorance and distinguishing it from the non-excusable one.
Sorry, Ekaterina, before you move on, may I ask just a clarification, because I really don't know the background. The initial distinction, the 4 cases you made, were a bit too, I mean, I couldn't follow them. So I want to make sure that your question is clear to me. So I'm asking you the question then. So is it the case that, am I right thinking that what you want to do is to distinguish between the case in which you don't know and you couldn't, the information you have didn't give you any reasons to doubt your own knowledge, as the first case, and the second case is the case in which you don't know, but your information may have prompted the kind of suspicion that what you know is actually not the case. Is this the distinction you want to make?
Yes, roughly speaking, yes.
Sorry, I mean
in terms of knowledge,
the approximation.
But basically, it is the idea. Yes.
Okay,
that's it.
Okay. So before actually, so I'm not interrupting you anymore. Is the second case? Sorry, is the first case related to what people usually call awareness in game theoretic contexts? Sorry, unawareness. So you just don't know and you couldn't possibly know. You have no access to that. Yeah.
This is a particular case. This deep ignorance basically is this unaware ignorance, so that you have no perception of the proposition under question.
Okay, so if I think of it in that way, I'm not too far off.
Yes, no, not too far.
Okay.
Yes. Also, there is a little bit confusion in the terminology between logicians, epistemologists, and philosophers in what is exactly deep ignorance, what is unaware ignorance. So there is a confusion in the literature, but I think that you have a good intuition in.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So now let's move to the formal stuff. So as a basis for this work, I take a system that we've introduced with Mattia Petrolo in our recent paper, a logic for factive ignorance. So there we were dealing with some other epistemological problems, not with the excusable ignorance, but the main point there is that we've introduced a static logical system interpreted on standard Kripke semantics, for which the main novelty is in introducing I operator. So from right now, I is our operator for ignorance as follows. So we said that an agent is ignorant of phi in a world W, if and only if for all accessible worlds, which are not the world W itself, phi doesn't hold, and phi holds in the world W. So this is quite interesting operator, and interesting for me result is that it is in general not definable via standard box modality, neither on K, T, S5, S4 frames. So quite original proposal here. So let me explain the functioning of this I operator on the following example. So consider the four worlds model. So we have truth of P and Q in W0. P is not true in none of the worlds W1, W2, W3, and Q is true in the world W2. So in this model, what we have? We have ignorance of P in the world W. Why? Because it is true and it doesn't belong to any accessible world, which is not W0 itself. Secondly, we have non-ignorance of Q. Why? Because Q, meanwhile, it is true, but there is a possible world which the agent accesses and where Q is true. And then we have the non-validity of ignorance of some proposition R, which is false in all the four worlds. Why? Because meanwhile it is in none of the worlds W1, W2, W3, it is not true in W0. And with our I operator, we're speaking about factive ignorance, the ignorance of true propositions. So having this, let me explain a little bit what are the worlds and what are the accessibilities between worlds in our framework. So as you might know, in standard epistemic logic, it is usual to say that the accessibility relation for K operator, operator for knowledge, is usually interpreted as indistinguishability relation. The worlds are indistinguishable for an agent if for all she knows, they all can be the actual one. So technically it is expressed by using the equivalence relation on the frames. However, let's see if this indistinguishability relation works for our semantic considerations. So assume that there is an agent who is effectively ignorant about P. So we have P true in a world W0, and for all accessible worlds, P doesn't hold. In other terms, negation of P holds. So if we say that in the world W0, the agent is ignorant of P because for all that she knows in W0, the worlds W1, W2, W3, which do not contain P, can be the actual one, it doesn't sound right for our semantic, for our assumptions about the reasons of ignorance. Ignorance depends not only on what we know, ignorance depends also on our assumptions about the real world. So having exactly the same example, it seems to us that it is much better to say that the agent's ignorance of P in W0 depends on the fact that from all that she considers as possibly true, from all the set of agents' assumptions, the worlds W1, W2, W3 might be the actual ones. So formally, we will introduce it as agnostic setting. So agnostic comes from Greek agnoia, which stands for ignorance. So we are speaking not about epistemic accessibility here and not about epistemic worlds, but about agnotically accessible worlds and agnotic accessibility. So we say that a world W prime is agnotically accessible from W if and only if from all that the agent knows and assumes, so we extend our set of what should be considered once we are speaking about ignorance. The agent cannot rule out the hypothesis that the world W is the actual one. So this being said, I just attract attention that we are not in the framework of standard epistemic logic, neither technically nor epistemologically. We distinguish our framework. So this being said, we had in our article sound and complete system, which is based on classical propositional logic. However, this thing about classical propositional logic as the underlying system for our model extension inputs some limits to our logic, and exactly shows that in such a form this LI system, epistemic logic of ignorance, is not yet suitable to represent unexcusable ignorance. So let me explain. We've defined I operator as follows. Morally, the definition should be read as the proposition is true in the actual world, and it is not true in all accessible worlds. But in the framework of classical propositional logic, we have this equivalence. So this means exactly that not phi holds in all accessible worlds, and we are not speaking about just non-truth of the proposition, but of truth of the negation of this proposition. So in all models, we will have we will always have the situation of ignorance as follows: P is ignored if in all agnotically accessible worlds, in all that is considered as possibly true, not P holds. So the agent sort of disbelieves the proposition P. Yes, Giuseppe?
Yes, sorry, just to not risk losing you. So this means that you can also have this combined with a standard K operator, because what one would say is that here the agent knows that not P, but you can't say this here because that's your definition of ignorance, right?
Yes, sort of. First of all, here we are not speaking about knowledge at all. So
no, that's why I say you could combine this with a K operator, which would have.
Sure, and it is an ongoing work of combination, but K operator is interpreted on S4 or S5 frames. And in this case, there will be no knowledge. If we consider reflexivity here, there will be no knowledge here. So this is one feature of combining our I operator and K. So they will not collapse between them.
And although you might have, if you have reflexivity, you might have the problem with belief, right?
Yes. But to be honest, I tend here it is a future.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just trying to set up my mind not to read this as an unknown epistemic operator, but as a completely different epistemic operator.
Yes. This is what I've been saying, that this accessibility means that these accessible worlds are sort of sets of assumptions about how the real world might seem for the agent. Yes, so it is separate from knowledge.
Yeah, sorry, your reply to Giuseppe actually showed me that I'm not following. So how do you actually read the accessibility relation? So we're at W naught now, and W naught, we know that P is true, right? No, sorry, W naught is such that P is evaluated classically to 1. Okay, so okay, what happens on W1? So what's the arrow? What the arrow means? What's
the arrow means that the agent considers the world W1 as a possible world, as a world which might be the actual one. He doesn't, but yes, it might be the actual one, but on the basis of his own assumptions. So these worlds are exactly what the agent considers to be possibly true, on which information he can act in the real world.
Okay, so but here I have a misunderstanding then of the whole thing, because in my view of basic Kripke structures, when you just were in W naught, that's the actual world, right?
Yeah.
And W1, 2, 3 are sort of epistemic or whatever possibilities, right?
Yes.
Are you saying now that on W naught P holding means that W1 is a possible state of the world?
No,
sorry, is an actual possibility. So I'm a bit confused. Yeah.
No, in W0 P holds means that P is true in the actual world. But
okay.
Once we say that ignorance of P holds in W0, what does it mean? It means that P is the case in W0 in actual world. And then in all what is considered by the agent as possibly true, in everything what he might assume as this might be the case, in this world, P doesn't hold. So this is exactly that he has no access to inputs which may indicate that it might be the case that P is true. I don't know if it replies.
Okay, so maybe it's just too strong the temptation to just use the usual reading. So I'll let you go on, and maybe.
And that's why I was saying. In fact, you could think then of this structure that you are showing, where these arrows are actually different. They are completely different interpretation than the standard accessibility relation in Kripke. So you could think them together with a structure in which the accessibility relation is the standard one, right? So you could think of from a W naught, P is true, and then at that actual word, you have all the accessibility relation that makes other possible truth. And then you have all the alternative possible words as far as the agent is aware or or considers possible, and those are your arrows.
Yes. Now, if we combine, it will be two. It will be bimodal.
Yes, exactly.
Model system that it will be different accessibility relations. Yes.
Sorry, I'm a terrible chair. I notice only now that there was a question on the chat by Ranjit, who is asking, is it correct that many of these notions of ignorance, the one you mentioned, so that's why I'm terrible. This was asked a while ago. Is it correct that many of these notions of ignorance assume a kind of logical omniscience, something like knowing a statement implies knowing all of its logical consequence? Is that something that you would agree with?
We should check with the concrete representations of each type of this ignorance, because it is different types of ignorance represented, in fact, by different operators, I would say. But normally, yes, I would say that in this setting, non-modified, we are in Kripke semantics, that it would be the case that we have logical omniscience. So it is like in standard epistemic logic with standard Kripke semantics. Yes.
Right. We'll let you go on now. Sorry.
Yes, thanks. So I've been saying that in our bivalent setting, we will always have the situation that an agent is disbelievingly ignorant of a proposition, but not deeply ignorant. In order to capture not only disbelieving ignorance, but also deep ignorance, our proposal is to break this equivalence. So use the first definition and say that ignorance of phi, the excusable ignorance of phi, as you will see later, holds in a world W if for all accessible worlds phi doesn't hold, which means that the agent doesn't considers this proposition as true one, and phi is true in the actual world. In this case, we will have our I operator will represent two crucial cases for excusable ignorance. First one, disbelieving ignorance. This is the case of ignoring P in W0. Why P is ignored? Because for all that is considered as a possibility, as alternative for the agent, not P holds, the agent considers this proposition as a false one. And then we have ignorance, deep ignorance of Q, which is based on the fact that Q is true in W0, but it is not considered neither as true one nor as false one in none of the accessible worlds. So our basic proposal is to replace classical propositional logic by a sort of three-valued logic with possible truth-value gaps. So formally, it is can be formalized as follows. We extend Kripke frames by possibly three-valued valuation function. So it assigns to each proposition either truth or falsity, or neither true nor falsity. Then we introduce our operators as follows. So conjunction and negation are standard Kleene operators. Then we can introduce implication. We have chosen to be as much close to the classical logic as we can, even though we are speaking about truth-value gaps. So we've decided to define an implication in bivalent way. So we say that phi implies psi is true if and only if phi is true and psi is true, or phi is untrue. So takes value false or neither true nor false. And in all other cases, implications are false. And similarly, we assumed that our I operator is also a bivalent operator, in fact, in which sense that, of course, either an agent is excusably ignorant or not excusably ignorant. Here we do not have the third option. So we defined the truth of I phi in W as follows. So it is true if and only if for all accessible worlds we have untruth of phi, so the agent doesn't consider it as a true proposition, and phi, of course, should hold in the world W. So this definition can be reformulated equivalently, as we've shown, in a more standard form with validities. So let me note to stop here. As the underlying system, we take the system which was proven to be sound and complete by Robles and her co-authors. This system contains 14 axiom schemes, which you see on the slide, as well as 5 derivation rules. So we formulate our logic of excusable ignorance on the basis of this system of Robles and her co-authors. Then we add 3 axiom schemes, so 2 of them are the same as in our bivalent case, and we add just a sort of excluded middle for formulas starting with I operator. We have the same rules as the static case, and we've proven that this 3-valued logic, model logic, is sound and complete. Basically, on the static level, we have already all the tools to represent separately the situations of excusable and non-excusable ignorance, our examples that I've introduced at the beginning of my talk. But I will do it. But first, let us think of the possible change of some agents, epistemic or agnostic states. So we will capture this possible dynamics of the epistemic states via public announcement logic, which is a model study of knowledge, belief, and public communication. It is used to reason about knowledge and belief and the changes brought about in knowledge and belief as per the occurrence of completely trustworthy, truthful announcements. So in what follows, first of all, of course, we will speak not about knowledge and belief, but we will speak about ignorance. Secondly, for the generality of our results, we will leave aside the idea of truthful announcement. So we will speak not on, we will permit to our announcement be not only truthful. And thirdly, we will question the conditions under which the announcement is considered as a trustworthy. But before stepping to our proposal, let's say some words about standard public announcement systems. So usually they are extensions of doxastic or epistemic logic with a special eliminative update procedure. So we say that after announcing phi, psi holds in a world W of model M, if and only if, whenever phi is true in W, this implies that psi holds in the world W of a modified by phi model M. And how this modified model is defined? It is just cutting off all the worlds which do not contain the announcements, so all the worlds in which the announcement is false, as well as the corresponding accessibility relations. So this is a standard usual definition for public announcement logics of the update procedure. Now let's see if we can use this standard announcement, which was created in fact for functioning on belief or knowledge operators. So consider the following model. We have ignorance of P in W0 because P doesn't belong to any accessible worlds but belongs to W0, and non-ignorance of some proposition Q. Assume that we have announced proposition P. In accordance with the standard definition, this means that we need to cut off all the accessible worlds W1, W2, W3 with the corresponding accessibility relations, which leaves us in a one-world model in which, first of all, ignorance of P is preserved because P is true, and in none of the worlds we have P. So this is already, after an announcement, the agent continues to be ignorant. This sounds already non-desirable for us. Moreover, even worse, we have created with such an announcement ignorance of Q in this one world model. So not only we preserve our ignorance, we create even ignorance with the standard update procedure. So this is not good, and this just shows that standard update procedure for public announcement logic is not suitable for our agnostic setting. So our proposal is as follows. So we define an announcement as follows. So after announcing phi, psi holds in the world W, if and only if consistency of the announcement and of all of its logical consequences is consistent with all the truth and truth which are not ignorant in the world W, this should imply that the updated model validates psi. So what are the novelties if we compare with the usual update? First of all, we are not claiming that phi, the announcement should be true. It should be consistent with what the agent is not, which truth, with the truth which the agent is not ignorant of. Secondly, we define update procedure not by the announcement itself, but by the announcement respectively to a world W. So let me explain how this model is defined. So you see the definition on the slide, but let me guide you through this definition on the following example. So consider we have a three-world model, three-world model where P is ignored in the world W and Q is true and not ignored in the world W again. And assume that we are announcing proposition P. So how does the modified model will look like? First of all, we keep all the previous worlds and we create a new world. The world which contains the announcement, all of its logical consequences, and all the truths which were not ignored in the world W. So in our example, it is the creation of world W, WP, which contains P and Q. Then we keep all the accessibilities as in the initial model. We add an accessibility from the world W, for which we make an update model, and this newly created world. Then we add accessibility between this newly created world to all the worlds which were accessible from W in the initial model. And then we just extend our valuation function with the case for the newly created world. So in this way, after P was announced, what would we have here? First of all, we will have non-ignorance of P after the announcement. Why? Because we now have this one input, one possibility. Secondly, we preserve, of course, all the truths which were not ignored, continue to be truth and continue to be non-ignored. So in the contrary to this eliminative standard update procedure. Here we have the procedure which preserves but enriches the initial model. So the system, we call it logic lay up for update. So it is an extension of our static system with the following principles. We have shown that it is sound and complete. Just a remark that the proof of completeness is not based on standard strategy of reducing reducing axioms. We used the extended model method for this. Then, having all these logical tools, all these technical tools, now we are in a full capability to, first of all, represent our initial examples, which we take from Kripke, and secondly, to see how one example can be transformed into another once we are speaking about dynamic change of the information. So the first example stated that an agent gives a poisoned chocolate to his daughter, but his ignorance of the fact that the chocolate might be poisoned provides him a full excuse for his action. So let's say that P stands for the chocolate might be poisoned. So for the simplicity, let's assume that this proposition is atomic, even though there is something alectic here involved, but we can afterwards modify this example. This is just for simplify the representation, the model. So we have, what does it mean for a father to be fully excusable for the fact that for his actions on the basis of the fact that he's ignorant that the chocolate might be poisoned. This means that we have a world W0 in which P is of course true, but in all the worlds for which the father accesses, for all that he can think of as a true proposition, he doesn't consider P as a true one. So he doesn't consider it neither true nor false, nor or he considers it even as a false proposition. So in this model, we have ignorance of P. And this is the case of our excusable ignorance. Then, in the second example, we said that the agent hears on the news that the maniac is poisoning chocolate in the neighborhood, and the chocolate in his and other houses might be poisoned. So for the simplicity again, we consider only the part of the news that the part where the agent hears the news, in which that the agent he hears this news that the chocolate might be poisoned. So he hears the proposition P. So basically, what happens in this case? The agent hearing the news means that an input, some piece of information was added to what he might consider as a true. So there was an announcement which the agent should not ignore anymore. So in our example, it was the creation of the new world, where we put the announcement as well as everything that is true and not ignored in W0. So in this case, after hearing the news, the agent, the father, had a piece of information which could indicate to him the truth of P. So now he's not ignorant of the proposition P, at least in the excusable way. Moreover, this example shows us the difference between the announcement in standard epistemic logic, which just eliminates everything, and the agent is always obliged to take the announcement as the truth in the last instance. The announcement produces knowledge once it is feasible in standard epistemic public announcement logic. Here we represent the situation in which the agent might hear the news, but as it is in real world, once we hear something on the news, we are not obliged to trust this information, to form our knowledge from this information. The news even can be false, but consistent with what we might consider as possibly true scenarios. So this is the basic idea behind of introducing this alternative definition of the public announcement. So now let me just conclude by summing up the results, maybe saying something else. So what we did, I presented to you today a complete system lay, which from a theoretical perspective captures the notions or the notion of excusable ignorance and distinguishes the cases of disbelieving and deep ignorance. Yes. So from technical perspective, this system, to the best of my knowledge, is the first one, which is characterized by relational semantics with truth-value gaps, the first ignorance system. Then we've detected a problem with straightforward extension of our logic to public announcements and provided an alternative definition. An interesting feature of this new definition is that feasible announcements now are not necessarily true. Moreover, on the basis of this definition, we've provided a sound and complete logic. And this system, at least from our perspective, permits us to model dynamic situations in which one's excusable ignorance can be transformed into non-excusable one. So what are the perspectives of this work? First of all, probably the update procedure by itself can be implemented for other settings, more standard, the doxastic or epistemic ones. So probably it is quite interesting to test our new definition on our formal models. Secondly, of course, it is interesting to consider not only Kripke semantics, not only public announcement setting, but for static system, we can extend our research to neighborhood semantics or other settings, as well as once we are speaking about dynamic epistemic logic, it would be quite interesting to see how can we do similar things or other in plausibility semantics. But these are the way to go for our further investigation. And for today, I just would like to thank you for your attention. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Katerina. And so